Hello, welcome to March's Masterclass. I'm Michaela. Welcome to those that are joining us for the first time and for our regulars. And if you're watching us on replay, welcome as well. So today we're going to be talking all about how we influence within our workplaces. So have you ever been in that situation where you've got this great idea, you've got this initiative, you've got this suggestion that you're working on, but maybe you're not the person who makes the final decision on whether this stuff happens or not. So we're going to talk today about how we can influence in a way that feels really aligned in who we are as individuals. So we're not going to be talking about manipulation or politics or anything like that. We're going to be talking about how to do influencing in a really effective way. And we're going to talk about this in the context of every different scenario that we could come across in our workplaces. But the story and why this came about is actually from an event I ran earlier in February. So before I get started on that, I do want to share something that's been kind of on my heart a little bit the last few days. So I haven't been on LinkedIn for a few weeks now, may even be a month actually. And although I know that I really need to get back into it because I do genuinely love the community that I'm part of on LinkedIn. I also want to remind anyone who is tuning in, who's maybe felt like I have that little bit of pressure to show up or be visible. And I want to remind you of this, all of it matters and none of it does. Marnie Nash reminded me of this in a workshop at lunchtime today, and it really landed for me because scrolling through today on LinkedIn, it turns out I haven't missed much, but I've also missed lots of things because this, for me, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, this is the core way that we engage with my business community. This is how I interact with people. This is what I enjoy doing. So I am back. But I am going to be back on LinkedIn, maybe in a slower, but hopefully more meaningful way. LinkedIn for me was never somewhere that I just would post about the last event I went to. I want to add value when I'm in this space, and I want to build proper, meaningful, genuine connections with people. So I'm having a bit of a rethink about how I'm going to do that in a way that feels good to me and also feels aligned with me, my work, my team, my business. So this means many people may not have even seen this masterclass pop up because, in all honesty, I only shared about it for the first time about an hour ago, unless you're on my newsletter, that is. So if you are here, thank you so much for being here, and let's dive in to what we're talking about today. So what is it that sometimes stands between you and your ability to create the change that you want to in your workplace, in your organization? Because for most of the leaders I work with, it's often, well, in fact, it's never a lack of knowledge. Yeah, they really know their stuff and they know what they want to achieve in their workplace. It's also often, it's not just resources issue. Yeah, it's not even time. Sometimes we think we're so full of busy and our diaries are so full, but actually for anything important, we can find and make the space. Often the thing that is standing between them being able to create the change that they want in their organization is that they can't get the buy-in from the people who actually make the decisions in their organization. And so what this often means is that they're not being able to get traction on the stuff that's really important to them. So we're going to dive into that today, and I'm going to tell you a bit of a story of how this kind of came about really as an idea for a masterclass. Because as you know, we do one each month. So if you want to watch the replay and see some of our previous topics, they are available on YouTube or on our LinkedIn page as well. So you know who I am, but if you haven't met me before, I'm Michaela Rini. I run an organization called Opportunity Global, and we work with what we call our accidental leaders. You may be one, or you may have worked with one before. These are technically brilliant people who are so competent in what they do, they get promoted, and then lo and behold, they're in a leadership role, they're leading people, and they haven't been given the true learning, support, coaching, and development to do that well. And that's what we do. We go into organizations and we help them with that stuff. Okay, so how do we get people to care about the stuff that we want to move forward? So this little story comes from February. So in February, I was facilitating an inclusive leadership event in Northumberland. And we were at the point in the day when we were in group discussions. And one of the people who were with us that day asked, how do I get my board to actually care about this stuff? So we were talking about all of the great ways us as individuals could be showing up in a more inclusive way in our everyday behaviors and actions. And we were talking about ways in which we could implement change across our organization to attract new talent and retain that talent. Someone else asked, how do I make them understand that by not doing this stuff, we're actually holding people in our team back? Another person said, future generations, they're not going to accept what we've all accepted in the workplace. So how do we make sure our leaders, the people who are in the decision-making roles, how do we make them see that so that change can really be effective and be truly embedded in the organization? So over the course of this discussion, there was probably about maybe 6 variations of the same kind of question in the room, all from different organizations, different sectors, but that same fundamental problem. These leaders could absolutely see what needed to change in their organization, in their team dynamics, in the structure. They absolutely knew that their organizations were actually at risk if they didn't adapt and change. But they were stuck either softening the message so much because they were worried about the reaction of people around them, or perhaps not speaking up and not being heard. So today, I'm going to try my best in 30 minutes, so it's not long, to tackle some of this. So we'll see how we go as we go along. But if there's any questions as we go, drop them in the chat, or we can pick them up separately if you want to send me a private message as well. So LinkedIn's always a good place to find me, or I'm also on Instagram, and I'll share my details again at the end of the session. So I'm going to share with you this 3A framework. It's actually one of our frameworks that we designed a few years ago, and we think that it really helps you to think about how you influence up, even when sometimes it feels like those senior leaders aren't listening to us. So whether you're trying to get buy-in for some inclusion initiatives or some culture change that you're working through, or to be honest, any idea that your leadership team sees as being much more of a kind of nice to have instead of something that's essential, this framework will help you do that. And as I said at the start, this isn't about manipulation. This isn't about playing politics. It's about having braver, truer conversations that actually create the change that we need in our organization. So let's start with the first A of this, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So align. The first is all about aligning. So most of us, when we approach influencing, we do it a bit backwards, yeah? We think about our idea, why we think it's important, and then we try to convince leadership to care about the same things that we care about. And if I'm really honest with you, that almost never works. Instead, I think what we need to do is to figure out what your leadership team or the key decision maker, whoever that is, figure out what they actually care about right now. Not in the future, not when there's more resources. What's the things that they really deeply care about right now? Not what you think they should care about, but really get aligned to and map out your idea to their goals. That's the kind of key first bit here. So you've got to get kind of really clear on 2 levels of what they care about. So I'm just going to go through to what I mean by that. So we want to map to your idea to their goals. But then I think an activity that works quite well is if you split it up, get two kind of columns and start to think about what does that person care about on an individual level and at an organizational level. Get super clear on what that looks like. So on an individual level, what does that executive care about personally? Is it their career progression? Is it their reputation with the board? Is it avoiding risk? Is it that they want to look innovative? Is it that they're wanting to scale and perhaps, are they on an acquisition trail of different organizations? Have a think about what is meaningful to them at an individual level. And then the second column, make a list of what's going on for them at an organizational level. So what do those leaders care about there? So what's the company's actual priorities right now? Is it revenue growth? Is it talent retention? Is it market share? Is it regulatory compliance? Really get clear on what those urgent, meaningful priorities are. What are the objectives that those leaders are working to? And then it's your job to connect the dots between what you're proposing, your idea, your culture change, your inclusive practice that you're wanting to bring in, and what they're already trying to achieve. You've got to connect the two things. So let me give you a quick example just to maybe help with this. Okay, so the wrong way, I suppose, as it were, to do this would be saying something like, we should focus on inclusion because it's the right thing to do. Yeah, that absolutely might be true. We all know that is the 100% the right thing to do, but it doesn't connect to what is keeping your CEO, your board, your leaders up at night. You've got to get clear on what that bit looks like. So maybe a better way to do this, I don't really like right and wrong here, so apologies that I use that language, but it gets the point across. But a better way to do this would be diverse organizations are 6 times more innovative. We know that data's out there. We know that research is true. And our competitors are already ahead of us on this stuff. And we're struggling to attract talent that we need to hit the growth targets that we've created. So if we don't shift now, we're actually in danger of potentially not existing in the same way that we do now in the next 5 to 10 years. Can you see the difference there? It's exactly the same idea and concept, but the framing of it is different. And one is more about a moral obligation, which we absolutely hope our leaders in the world would have. But the other is also about business survival, which quite honestly is critical, for every organization, especially in the current climate. So we've got to think about how we frame things to really hone in on what is keeping your leaders up at night. So as we think about Align as our first part of this 3A model, before you walk into that conversation with your leadership team, your CEO, whoever it is, ask yourself, what are their top 3 priorities right now? Not last quarter, not last year, not what might be said in the strategic plan that's some big document that's held somewhere or, 50 slide deck document. Instead, think about what's actually keeping them up at night this week. Right now, what's the kind of urgent thing that is challenging them? I think the next thing is thinking about what success would look like in their language. So if you're talking to the CFO, for example, that's probably going to be more focused on numbers and the finances. If you're talking to the chief people officer, it's going to probably be more focused around retention and engagement. So really think about your audience and what's going to be most critical to them. The next thing to think about is how will you actually measure impact in a way that these individuals that you're engaging with actually care about? So not in a way that feels good to you, not in the simplest way, but what is it that they care about? So rather than just saying we want a better culture, get really clear into the detail. So for example, you could think about, actually, we're going to reduce turnover of staff by X%, or we're going to increase innovation metrics by Y. So get really clear on what that actual change and shift will be, so that you can really measure something that people care about and that's going to have the biggest impact on you and your organization. So I'm just quick water break. Anyone who's joined before, I love to chat. So this could go on longer than 30 minutes, but I'm going to really try and keep to it. And critically, when you're going through this, I think it's also really important to absolutely sell the benefits and the positives of what you're wanting to do and achieve. But I also think it's important to really dig deep into what happens if we don't do this. What's the risk there? What's the consequences that we're actually going to be facing as a team and as an organization? Because sometimes the fear of what we might lose or what might not go as well as we need it to can be more motivating than the promise of some gain that might feel a little bit kind of abstract at this point in time. So alignment is the foundation here, but it's not enough on its own, because even when leadership, so when I say leadership, I mean whoever it is you're trying to influence, whether that's CEO, board, leadership team, or someone else in your organization, because even when they agree with you, things still don't change unless there is true accountability for that change. I honestly firmly believe that no culture change happens in an organization without accountability. So this brings us nicely to the second A, which is all about anchoring into accountability. So what I want to kind of, I guess, talk about here and just land for you a little bit is that accountability, again, I know I've said this already, but I talk about it a lot and I think it's really, really important. Accountability is the only thing that shifts culture, full stop. I don't think there's anything else that does. You can have all the alignment in the world. You can have everyone with these beautiful strategy documents, all in agreement, loads of great presentations. Everyone's all saying all the same things. But unless we have accountability, nothing will change. So people might nod along enthusiastically in your meetings. They might say, yep, this is super important, but we need that accountability to actually make sure this stuff sticks. So how do we actually do that? What does it look like? I'm going to give you some thoughts on that now. So make it a key objective. So rather than anything that you're trying to embed from a culture perspective or from a inclusion perspective, rather than it just being for HR or your diversity champions or your culture champions or whatever it is you call those sorts of people that are given that task, that project in your organization, it can't just be for them. It's got to be for everyone. So making inclusion a key objective for every single person in your organization is super, super powerful. When inclusion or whatever it is that you're trying to drive forward becomes part of everyone's objectives, suddenly this stuff is not optional. It's absolutely essential, and it becomes a clear part of every kind of conversation and engagement people are having, whether that's in performance reviews, bonus time, whatever it might be. It's got to be linked in. To make it even more powerful, link it to performance and to the bonuses of the people in your organization. I know it feels kind of gross, to be honest, that we have to do this to get people to really care about this stuff. But you know what? Sometimes I think needs must, yeah? And it's okay if it means that eventually this is going to be tied into the fundamental culture of your organization. So when people's compensation is tied to outcomes, things suddenly get very real very quickly for people in your organization. The next part is making this stuff measurable. So the things that we measure in our organizations are the things that typically get done or get focused on. So define clear metrics, create a dashboard, make it progress really visible to people, because then it suddenly becomes much more real, especially when something is often a feeling, an observation of behavior. It can be quite difficult, I think, for people to tangibly know when that culture's shifted. So you've got to get clear on measurables so that you can see that visible progress. The other part of this, and I think this is where you get people really tuned in to the changes that are coming, the new initiatives, the new ways of working, whatever it is that you're trying to roll out, is by making it really visible. So you're going to need regular reporting. You're going to need board updates happening, town halls with the whole organization, because when leadership has to publicly account for some of this progress, or sometimes the lack of it, behavior changes. When this becomes something that everyone is bought into, that everyone's talking about, suddenly over time, slowly but surely, you'll start to see that behavior change take place. And that's when you know it's working. Yeah, that's when we know. So I like this slide. I think it's a good reminder, right? Let me be honest about some of this stuff. I do kind of hate that we have to tie things to money and performance sometimes, and those kind of performance metrics or whatever we are measuring to make them matter. I know it shouldn't be that way, but I've seen it work. Yeah, I've seen it work in lots of organizations. I was talking to a brilliant big financial services organization earlier in March when I was at an awards event. And that we were talking about this. When organizations make inclusion a key objective for everyone, not just a nice to have, not just a tick box, not just doing the bare minimum, when it's then in addition to that linked to performance related bonuses, suddenly things become much more actionable. Things become much more relevant to people. More things are included into the agenda item of key meetings and key decisions with the right people in the room. And suddenly, it might not happen instantly, but you will find that a lot of people then have a better, clearer plan of how they're going to handle this stuff. And suddenly, some resources may become more available. Sometimes we don't have time for this disappears. It's not perfect. Yeah, there'll still be things that are challenging, but it does create the opportunity to have change happening at a bigger scale. I do believe that. I really do. So have a think about how you can be tying this stuff into the objectives of your team and the wider organization. Now, if you can't necessarily influence that change across the business right now, maybe you start with your own team. Maybe you get clear on where you bring inclusion into as a clear objective and how that might work for you in your kind of department team. It might be worth something to think about. Okay, so a couple of things to think about when you're looking at this kind of anchor piece. So we've been through alignment. We're now on to how we anchor this stuff in of our 3A model. So you've got to ask yourself things like, what would make your leaders accountable for what you're suggesting? So rather than them just agreeing with it, actually accountable for making it happen. How can we measure progress in ways that really matter to them? Where can we create that visibility? Is it board meetings? Is it all hands calls? Is it something else? We've got to get clear on how we're actually going to make this stuff a reality. And here is the slightly uncomfortable bit. What consequences might exist if nothing changes? Is there a way that we can put some consequences in place? Because actually, if there isn't consequences, does accountability always happen? Possibly not. So we've got to think about what that looks like. So for example, if you roll out inclusion as a key objective, and when it comes to performance review time, that is not taken seriously, and there are not consequences for people who do not start to embed inclusion as an everyday practice as a leader, there's got to be a conversation that happens there. Yeah. There's got to be some feedback. There's got to be maybe a braver, more challenging conversation so that people start to really understand that this isn't going away and this is a key part of how we're going to work as an organization. So in where we've got to so far, we've aligned to their priorities. We've anchored in to that with accountability, but none of it would matter. You probably know what I'm going to say because I say this quite a lot. None of this would matter if people don't know how to actually do it day to day. So this brings us to the third part of the 3AA model. And this is all about how we actually make action happen. How do we activate to make it as easy as possible for people to honor what we've committed to, what this new inclusion initiative is, what this culture change is that you're pushing, so that that really just becomes embedded in our everyday behaviors. Yeah. Okay. So we can't change another person's behavior. I'm really sad to tell you. I wish we could, right? It would be so much easier. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't have a business if that was the case. So all we can do as leaders and contributors in our workplaces is we can role model the behavior that we want to see. We can make it easy for people around us to do the right thing. We could build out systems or habits or ways of working so that this stuff becomes default, not the exception. So that's the things we can control in this situation. But there's some mistakes, I think, that we do still see happen when people are rolling out culture change. And it's often I think this is the kind of biggest mistake I think we probably see people make, is that we think change happens through policy. So we'll create a new inclusion policy. We will create a new practice about how we do certain things, what behavior we expect in our organization. We may even go a step further and roll out training. We'll send an email from the CEO, from the leadership team, and then nothing fundamentally changes, because at that point, we haven't actually made this new way of working a part of our everyday practice. And, you know, if we think about it, inclusive leadership as a topic sounds like something we'd all want in our organizations, right? Because it's about being intentional in our commitment to the communities we serve, the people that we serve, and that intentional kind of commitment to do this stuff day in, day out, when there's no thanks, when there's maybe not even anyone watching, that's when things really shift in terms of the talent that we can attract and retain in our organization, because we've created this space that is psychologically safe. We've built in universal design into our ways of working so that people truly feel like they belong when they come to work with us. So instead of just bolting on inclusion as a policy, we really want to build it into the fundamental universal design of your organization. So what does that even mean? Okay, so I don't think inclusion should be a separate initiative. It is absolutely embedded into how we hire people, how we run meetings, how we make decisions in our organization, how we develop our talent. So it's not just something that you do once in some training. It's got to be a habit that we practice daily. And I don't think it's the job of HR or L&D or your head of diversity. It's got to be everybody's job. It's got to be built into how work gets done in your organization. That's when you start to really see a shift. I'm conscious of time for everyone, so I'm going to skip through this a little bit. The key questions that I think we need to kind of ask ourselves when we are looking to kind of activate and role model this stuff is that we can't force the people around us to change, but we can actually show them what's possible. So when we consistently demonstrate our inclusive behaviors with our own team, your team performs better, they innovate more, talent is retained for longer, that becomes impossible for other leaders in your organization to ignore. When you have those braver conversations and the outcome is positive change, others will notice. When you build accountability into your own area of influence and it works, it becomes a bit of a best practice and a blueprint for other people around you. So you've got to influence through example, not by waiting for permission, but by showing people what is possible right where you are right now. So these are the questions to think about. What everyday behaviors actually need to change. So get really specific on not just saying we need to be more inclusive, but what does that look like in practice? What is maybe happening and that is working well, and what needs to be developed and improved upon? Have a think about how you can make the right thing the easiest thing. So how do we remove barriers? How do we ensure that this is easy and straightforward for people to get behind? What defaults can we change in how people behave or interact in meetings, for example? So it could be there simple as thinking about how you roll out a new practice for how people do meetings, making sure agendas are sent first, making sure that's built into universal design for how a meeting runs in your organization. You might also want to think about what systems or processes might need updating, because if your systems are designed for the old way of working, people will still default to that old way, no matter what the policy might say. So have a think about what that looks like. And maybe there's people that are doing this well already in your organization that you can learn from. So look inside your organization. Somebody might have already figured out some of this stuff and is doing it well. And you can then really lean on that and use some of that to help you. Yeah. Okay. So just to close out, this is the framework in its entirety. So it's about aligning to their priorities. So rather than selling our idea, map it to their goals, connect it to what your leaders, your CEO, whoever it is in your organization, what they actually care about, both at an individual level and organizationally as well. Anchor with accountability. So make this stuff measurable, tie it to objectives, tie it to performance, create that visibility in your organization, because accountability, like I said before, it's the only thing that shifts culture. Yeah. You can have all the pool tables, endless holidays, freebies, perks, whatever you want in your culture, but the only thing that will fundamentally change it is accountability. And the final one was activate through action. So build it into everyday habits and systems and behaviors, role model behavior, make the right thing the easy thing. Yeah. And before we want to wrap it up, I just want you to have a think about, is there a conversation? Is there an individual that you could engage with in the coming days, weeks, that maybe you've avoided the conversation a little bit, that you could use this framework to really think about how you influence the change that you want to bring in your team, in your organization? I would love you to get back in touch with me and tell me how that conversation went for you. Of course, you can drop any questions in the comments and I'll definitely get to those. But you think about what's that conversation, how you can use the 3A framework to make it happen. And then do tell me, get in touch with me on social media, drop me a message. I'd love to hear how that goes for you. And so there's just one final thought from me. If you find this leadership stuff useful, if you're thinking about how you can better show up as a leader in your workplace, how you can navigate some of these more challenging conversations, how you give feedback effectively, how you create that really great culture where your team really want to show up at work and do a great job, we've got a leadership community called Starts With Us, and it's now open for new members to join. So within Starts With Us, you get access to monthly workshops online, group coaching where you can bring your unique challenges and be supported by experts on how to unpick and how to deal with that stuff. You'll have a community of other leaders around you who are going through the same things that you can share best practice with, who you can feel less alone with. There's also a massive library of content that you can work through in your own time. And each year, we also run some in-person events that you would be invited to. So if you'd love to find out more, the QR code is there for you to explore. So you can scan that and find out more. If you struggle with that QR code for whatever reason, I will also share the link for you to find out more as well. It is a paid for community, but it's very cost effective. And if you have a team of people that would like access, drop me a message because we could talk to you about a really cost effective way to do that. So that is the end of our masterclass for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back in April and we're continuing these each month completely for free because we're so passionate about trying to democratize some of this learning and make it more accessible for more people. Because I honestly believe we can change workplaces, we can make them better, but it's got to start with us doing the work on ourselves first. So have a great rest of your day. And I'd love your feedback on whether an afternoon slot works well for these masterclasses. We've done morning and afternoon. So do let us know. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.